Thanks as always to our podcast patrons over on Patreon and our producer-level patrons, Katie, the redhead of Toussaint, Jacob, oh, I've got a grumbly puppy. Hi, grumbly puppy. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Snarf, snarf, snarf. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to be back. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. I'm so excited to see some of you guys in Vienna for this year's European Hanza meetup. Totally looking forward to it. Can't wait to share all the pictures and videos with you guys on social. It'll be a really great trip. So be sure to keep a lookout on the Breakfast in Beauclair social media channels for all the news around that. Thanks as always to our patrons over on Patreon and our producer-level patrons, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Bangor Glamorai, The Original Roach, Cottonrear's Cat, Libby, John of Herblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. As for this episode, Alycia from France and Sarah A. from the UK call in for Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 3. Join us as we discuss Geralt and Yennefer's atypical relationship, the role of sorcerers on the continent, Sapkowski's framing narratives, and Watership Down. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Time of Contempt, Chapter 3. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming back two members of our hanza to the show. You'll recognize today's guests from their legendary appearances on episode 45 and 46 of Breakfast in Beauclair, covering Blood of Elves, Chapter 7. They're a nurse from France and a newly minted doctor from the UK. Please welcome back Alycia from France and Dr. Sarah A. from the UK. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Oh, goodness. I'm so excited to have you both back because your episodes were just such a standout, not just on the last book, but also I think on Breakfast in Beauclair, like hard stop, period. I loved you guys getting to meet each other. It's been 2 years since we last sat down to record. So how have you guys been and what's been new with you?
Oh, well, yeah, I feel like a lot has changed because last time we did the episode, I was just finishing my master's and going back into my 4th year of medical school. And now I've finished medical school and I've graduated. Yay! And I guess I'm a doctor now, which feels really weird.
Yay!
I'm like, what? I can prescribe now? What the fuck? Like,
good for you.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it feels nice to finally be done with the training and just finally have graduated and be like, no matter what happens, I can't take my degree away from me. So, you know, that feels nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations. It's been so surreal, I think, watching your journey, just through the Discord and over the last few years. And it's just like, you're a doctor now. Yay.
Oh, thank you. It was very nice to have all my friends at Breakfast in Beauclair. You know, they're cheering me on from the sidelines, especially during the last 2 years, which were very, very busy and very, very, a lot of hard working required, let's say that.
Mm-hmm. And what's been new with you, Alycia? How have you been?
Fine. I mean, I'm still a nurse. I'm still working exactly at the same place I was working last time. I still don't like it, but hey, it's a job. No, honestly, it's been fine. I feel like since the last time I did that, I've become involved into the Breakfast in Beauclair, Discord, everything. And, you know, I've played D&D and I've met a lot of lovely people. And that was like that episode was really my entrance to it. So I'm really glad for it because I got to meet a whole lot of people, got to meet all of you guys, got to meet Sarah more especially because we've seen each other a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you've come round to my house. You've met my family.
I met her parents. I met her whole family. We're now dating. I mean, We're not, but
Listen, we can dream. It's fine.
we just need to move in the same place because I don't do long distance, and then it's done.
Well, I'm so glad that your friendship started with Breakfast in Beauclair. Again, it's very surreal to know that you guys have met up in real life. I still need to meet both of you actually. Soon. Hopefully
you
soon.
You need to come to the UK. And wherever you are in the UK, I will get on a train and meet you, guaranteed. So,
That feels like both a threat and a promise, and that makes me very excited.
It is both. We will meet, and you do not have a choice in the matter.
No, I don't think I do. Today, we'll continue our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 3, in which Geralt and Yennefer attend the Conclave of Mages at the Isle of Thanedd. Here's a quick synopsis of the chapter from future Alyssa. In Chapter 3, Geralt accompanies Yennefer to the Conclave of Mages on the Isle of Thanedd. There they attend a banquet and socialize with various members of the fraternity, in addition to important non-magical figures such as Dijkstra, head of the Redanian Secret Service, who predicts that Vilgefortz will proposition Geralt and places a wager on it. Geralt meets mages such as Marty Stodergen, Sabrina Glevissig, and Kira Metz, and reunites with Triss Marigold, Philippa Eilhart, and Dorigere of Vol. Geralt and Yen sleep together after the ball, and Geralt tells the sorceress the details of his conversation with Vilgefortz in the Gallery of Glory, which shows the history of magic on the continent from the first landing through Falca's rebellion. One of the paintings depicts the meeting of Cregan of Laud and Lara Doran eb Shidal, legendary lovers torn apart and destroyed by the Time of Contempt. He was a sorcerer and she was an elf. Lydia, Vilgefortz's assistant and a talented painter, hangs a new portrait of Lara from an ancient miniature, and she has Ciri's eyes. We learn that a sorceress reinforced the walls of Garstang with a powerful aura and anti-magic blockade. No spells have worked in Garstang, and discussions between mages have been peaceful since. Above, Tor Lara, the Tower of the Gulls, is supposedly connected to the undiscovered Tor Ziriel, the Tower of Swallows. Vilgefortz tries to convince Geralt to join the ranks of mages and to side with him in the upcoming war. The mage shares his history as an abandoned orphan adopted by druids. Later, he became a mercenary, then a fugitive. At the end of the worlds, he met a sorceress and then became a sorcerer out of hate and spite for her. Toward the end of his conversation with the Witcher, Vilgefortz threatens Ciri. Yennefer tries to quell Geralt's fears for Ciri, insisting that the girl will be safe in Aretuza with her. They make love again, and afterward, Geralt thinks of lovely scenery while Yennefer's telepathic abilities are sharpened. So now that we've got an overview of the chapter, we're just going to talk about our overall thoughts, highlights and lowlights, and any interesting references that we happen to find in Sapkowski's writing. So could you guys tell us a little bit about what you thought about Time of Contempt Chapter 3?
I think it's a great chapter. It's the first time that we've seen so many mages in one area. We've met a few mages over the course of the books, but it's only ever really been one-on-one with Geralt. Mm-hmm. We've never seen so many all together, and we also rarely see them interacting with each other. I think the last time we saw that was the previous chapter with Rita and Tisea in the bathhouse and stuff like that. But even then, that was kind of different because they're friends, they're hanging out, they're naked and they're drinking wine. Whereas this is these are colleagues, and many of them do not like each other. So I think it is really interesting that it really gives insight into how mages kind of operate as a political and social class that is very far removed and very, very different from everyone else in the Witcher universe. Mm-hmm. They operate in such a different way because they're so fundamentally different. And I just think it's interesting that we get to see that in a way that we wouldn't normally get to see, and we wouldn't get the impression of how they kind of play off each other and their priorities and their social etiquettes and stuff like that. So I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's the first time that we also see all the mages in sort of an official professional setting, because all the magic that we've seen before, even if we're seeing Yennefer do stuff and Triss, it was always sort of off the books and they're doing it for friends. And right now, you see them in a professional setting and they're all interacting with each other. There's a lot of rules to follow, and there's a lot of people that don't like each other. I'm wondering if it feels more like a high school reunion or a work party.
Yeah.
I'm confused about it. Yeah,
oh my god, did you see her? She joined a fucking pyramid scheme in Temeria. Oh my god, so trashy.
But it really feels like it at some point, with especially with Sabrina and Yennefer. I mean, we're gonna get into it, but with Sabrina and Yennefer, it feels really like high school reunion, you really hate them, but you're oh.
Yeah, I think a huge chunk of this chapter is really dominated by Thanedd and the ball, and it's interesting because we're with Geralt throughout the entirety of this chapter as he's really struggling to establish his place somewhere where he feels so out of sorts.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of his perspective for the whole chapter, is just being out of place with all of these mages, feeling like he doesn't have any sense of control in his conversation with Vilgefortz, which takes up half the chapter as well.
Yeah.
So he's on the back foot the whole time. And this is a character that I think book readers will know is like, it's not uncommon for him to be kind of out of place in figuring stuff out. But I think up until this point, he's relatively self-assured, particularly in things like the short stories. And so when we get to this point, he's just so far out of his element that this isn't really something that we see up until now. This becomes a common theme in the rest of the books.
Yeah.
But for now.
Like, get used to it.
Yeah, he's a moron in the rest of the books. But for now, this is the first kind of real insecurity I think we're getting out of him since maybe A Shard of Ice.
Yeah.
Like when it was him and Istrid. But yeah, it's interesting to see. In terms of highlights and lowlights, some of the more flowery prose throughout the chapter was really nice. I know that we're obviously missing stuff from the Polish translation, but there are some lovely metaphors that happen. The description of the ball is very fun. We get a lot of repetition in Sapkowski's writing, in both like things that Geralt sees. It's like, titties everywhere.
Yeah.
And every time we see a pair of titties, it's the same kind of thing. Geralt's very upset that everything is so extravagant and yet has absolutely no substance.
My serious highlight would be like, there are so many great Yennefer moments in this chapter, like that you can all choke on your envy, or like the towards the end with like the house thing, and there's just so many great moments in like the confession. So like there are so many, and even the sex scene, like Sapkowski is very good at like making the sex scenes really like flowery and metaphorical in a way that feels like interesting and not kind of like cliched and stereotypical. So those are my serious highlights. And my silly highlight is the moment that I found really funny, which is when Dargaret is like, OMG Geralt, isn't it so awful that all these sorceresses are wearing like endangered species skins? Just look at them. And Geralt's like, okay, stares at Sabrina's breasts really intently. It's like he obediently stared at Sabrina's breasts, and it's like, yeah, that sounds about right.
He's such a guy in that moment. It's like, and there's this mention that like Yennefer knows that he's doing it, and it's a bit like, okay, so you're gonna do that. Kind of moment. She doesn't even try to like berate him about it. It's more of a like, her boobs are out, so I mean, not that she's asking for it, but you know, like the boobs are on show, so you know, you kind of gonna look at them, but Geralt is like, oh well.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes of him too is when I believe it's Sabrina and Marty Sturgeon are talking about him in the Elder Speech, and they're talking about all the ways that they'd like to fuck him on a rock, on a hedgehog. He hid his face behind a prawn on a lettuce leaf, feeling so grateful he didn't have the ability to blush. And I'm like, you're an idiot. But it's very sweet.
Yeah, it feels like a very sort of, especially the first half, it feels like a very funny and sort of light chapter. You know, you're all doing this thing, and there's a lot of humor in it. Like a lot of the characters say funny things, and there's a lot of humorous things happening. But it's. I mean, I don't want to be spoiler for the next chapters, but that's really sort of like the calm before the storm, because that's really like the build up to like a massive switch in the story. So it feels good to have this moment of levity, of this moment of fun with the characters, and we're all like eating and dancing. I'm assuming, not really, but in my mind they do. But yeah, it's fun.
Before there's a very big status quo change. And I guess that's all we'll say about that.
Yeah.
For now, Geralt can just stare at titties and with not a care in the world. Everything's okay.
And it's just like, he'll find out tomorrow.
Yeah.
The whole chapter, tomorrow. And I think it leaves both Geralt and the reader just this sense of foreboding, as we'll talk about later. I think one of the chapter lowlights for me, I don't even know if it can be considered a lowlight, the conversation between Geralt and Vilgefortz. We'll talk about it in detail. I think I blacked this out. Time of Contempt is probably one of the books that I know the least because I've reread it the least often. I knew this conversation happened. I forgot how much of it there was.
Oh my god,
It was very long. We've only seen Vilgefortz in one other chapter, I think Blood of Elves chapter 5. And so to have extended time with him in the perspective of a character that we love and we empathize with was incredibly interesting. And yeah, I'm sure I'll talk a bit more about that later.
Yeah, that was definitely a low light. When I was reading through it, and I was like, yeah, having fun at the banquet. Oh, look at all these nice dresses. Oh, so exciting. And then Vilgefortz is talking for like 5 hours, and I wanted to throw my book out the window. I was like, you're so insufferable and annoying and pretentious that this is not fun to read. I want to kill you. Can you please shut the fuck up? And then Sapkowski, he would like give you a moment of like reprieve by like going back to Geralt and Yennefer, and then he's like, no, time for torture again. It's more Vilgefortz.
Yeah, I feel like every time I reread that, because I do really like that book, but I feel like every time I reread, I sort of like go and like switch my part. I'm like, I don't need that. It's fine.
Yeah. Credit to Peter Kenny that he actually makes that, you know, at least interesting to listen to and like still in a kind of gross way because the content is a little but
yeah, Vilgefortz speaking in my voice because it's my thoughts saying all this dumb shit. You know,
I would listen to that. I would listen to you narrate the whole entire series.
I would just hear Sarah's interjections like, you're such a dumbass.
That's what we need. Sarah's commentary version.
Yeah. I'll release like a 7-hour listen along audiobook.
Yeah.
Like it's just Sarah's just silence. Wow, that's stupid. Just keeps going. It'll make it so much more delightful. So one of the things I always feel obligated to ask or talk about as we discuss the books is cultural or historical references. They're so prevalent throughout Sapkowski's writing, especially as he's usually making references to pan-European historical or political events, folklore, that sort of thing. And one of the more obvious ones that, like, at least I personally got as someone who grew up Catholic was Jan Becker, who was like one of the first pioneers of the continent, forcing water to gush from a rock. And I was just like, oh, look, Moses in the Bible. And so I was wondering if you guys happen to catch anything else from your perspectives.
There was one that actually I picked up on specifically because I'm English. And that is, it's during the stupid Vilgefortz conversation. And they're talking about Falca. They mentioned Falca when they're talking about the paintings. And he says, like, oh, children, because they were saying, like, Falca was burnt at the stake for the whole rebellion and blah, 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 all that. The little thing that just happened in history, you know, it's not a big deal. And he said that children in Temeria and Redania still play at burning Falca on, and forgive my pronunciation, Seovine? Like Halloween. They burn Falca on, they play at burning Falca on Halloween. And I'm pretty certain that's meant to be a reference to Bonfire Night. You would not have known necessarily about this because it's an English thing. But on the 5th of November in Britain, you celebrate Bonfire Night, which is basically ages ago, centuries ago, a guy called Guy Fawkes, so his first name was Guy, he decided that he didn't like Parliament and he wanted to blow it up. But he failed. He botched it up. Someone in the group was an idiot and alerted everyone that they had this plan, kind of like inadvertently betrayed them all. They got caught. He was executed and Parliament was not blown up. And so every year on the 5th of November, because that's when he was caught, you celebrate Bonfire Night. And he was actually hung, drawn, and quartered. But for some reason, one of the traditions of Bonfire Night is you make a big bonfire and you burn the guy. So you have like a little scarecrow, or some people just use like a pillowcase stuffed with shit. Some people don't even do this anymore, but like traditionally you would have the guy that you put in the bonfire and you burn on the bonfire. And that's meant to be like, yay, he didn't blow up everything. Woohoo. It's like, this is a normal thing. And also you set off fireworks and stuff like that. It's a normal thing for us. It sounds really morbid when I explain it to anyone who did not grow up with it, that it's like, yeah, we burn this guy on the bonfire to celebrate the fact that he didn't blow up Parliament, but that's something that we do. And the little rhyme is like, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plots. It's like a little rhyme. So that's like, I assume that was meant to be a reference to Bonfire Night. Yeah, so that's something that you might not pick up on if you didn't know the holiday.
I mean, we also in France, but I feel like that's a very universal thing about having a party where you burn stuff.
Yeah, we just, as a human race, we just really like to burn stuff.
Yes, no, because in France we have the Saint-Jean party, which is at the end of summer. I'm pretty sure it's to celebrate the beginning of summer or something.
Mm.
And there's a big party with music, blah, blah, blah. And there's also a fire. And you're supposed to jump over the fire. Once the fire is turned off and you only have the coals, you're supposed to jump over for happiness and whatever for the year. And I feel like every culture has this version of let's burn shit up for good luck.
Yeah.
Because it's just fun.
I need to add in the audio that Dr. Sarah made such a face when Alycia was talking about jumping over hot fire.
Actually,
My medical training doesn't cover this.
I have to say something about that because I work in pediatrics, and recently I had a child really badly burned because of that.
Oh my
His
God.
dad had him in his arms and jumped, and the kid fell, and it was a whole thing. I will not go into other details, but Sarah is right to be wary of it.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
no.
You know what? I'm calling bonfire night superiority because we don't do that shit. We just make a big bonfire and we look at it. We don't jump over it because we're not insane. Okay.
I mean, I would never jump over it, and I would more especially never jump over it with a 3-year-old child in my arms, but whatever.
I would hope not.
Oh my goodness. Well, there was one other reference that you also noted, Sarah.
Oh.
Should I lay out the red carpet for you?
This isn't a reference that Sapkowski made deliberately. This was just something, and it's not specifically about this chapter, but it's a funny coincidence that I noted, and I basically got into a dare with Emily, my sister, that I would manage to bring this up because it's quite random. But basically, there's a book called Watership Down, and it's about rabbits. Just trust me with this. In Watership Down, one of the things that the rabbits do is they talk a lot about their rabbit culture, and they have stories and legends about a specific rabbit figure who was very kind of like an Odysseus, Brer Rabbit type of figure, and he did all these cool things. Called Alycia, that was his name. And among the main group of rabbits, there's a specific rabbit who is the best at telling these stories. So every time they want to hear a story about Alycia, they're like, "Oh, tell the story about this thing or that thing," and that rabbit. It's called Dandelion.
Aww.
Just like the Witcher Dandelion. So they both have these two very separate pieces of media, both have a storytelling character called Dandelion. And I just thought that was funny. And I thought it would be funny to bring it up in a podcast about the Witcher as well. And who knows, maybe David French was a secret stan of Watership Down, because obviously Yaskia is Buttercup, so maybe that's why he's Dandelion instead of Buttercup,
Maybe
he just really liked Watership Down.
We'll have to ask him if we ever get a hold of David French.
Anyway, so that's my dare completed. Bring up fucking Watership Down in a witch podcast. There we go.
And check. So now that we've kind of gone over some of our overall thoughts, highlights, and lowlights, let's get down into all the details of the chapter. Just to start off, there's a preface to each chapter throughout Time of Contempt. This specific one is prefaced with traditional wedding vows, contrasted with Dandelion's excerpt from half a century of poetry that talks about love is like the shape of a pear. Try to describe the shape of a pear. How do you guys think that these traditional vows and Dandelion's excerpt preface the chapter effectively or ineffectively?
A dandelion, just like the rabbit from Watership Down. I think it's cool that he introduces it this way. Aside from the fact that I think it's nice that the chapter, despite all the political shit happening, the chapter ends with Yennefer and Geralt. I think it was appropriate, and also this is where they have their confession. I think it was definitely appropriate to have it focused on love instead of political ongoing shit.
Mm-hmm.
I think I like the whole thing about love is like a pear. Try to define the shape of a pear, because I assume that it's the fact that it's an atypical description of love because love itself is atypical. There's no one way to describe it. It's different for every single person. Every person's going to view love and view their partners in a different way to another couple. It's indescribable. You can't just put a neat and tidy bow on it. And especially for characters like Yennefer and Geralt, who are very different from normal people, who are way older than normal people would be. And comparing that with a very traditional marriage vow that is very traditional, it's kind of cliche, stereotypical. It kind of emphasizes the fact that it's no, there is no neat and tidy vow that you can have with love, because love is like a shape of a pear. There isn't, you can't describe it properly. But I think it's nice, especially because Dandelion's poets is all he specializes in making these big romantic ballads and stuff like that. But I like that here he's saying, actually, no, you can't describe it properly.
I feel like it's also like the last time where you can have something beautiful and poetic and about love. I remember like being really ominous about what's going to happen after, but like when you read the whole entire thing, like what other time are you going to have some pretty poetry about Dandelion about love, right? So like put it here. It's pretty, it fits, it works.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Sarah, especially when we talk about like Geralt and Yennefer's relationship against like the normal typical relationship. Like when we look at traditional wedding vows, like till death do us part, in sickness and in health, yada yada yada. And the nature of Geralt and Yennefer's relationship has ebbed and flowed over the course of decades, right? And so when we think about their relationship right now, I know that I know for some people, the nature of their relationship can be very polarizing because it's untraditional. We don't we don't talk to those people.
We're not friends with them.
I recognize that for some people, their relationship can be polarizing. And so there's no one way to talk about love and to experience love. And I feel like this preface, as well as the entirety of the chapter, kind of reminds us of that. We see Geralt and Yennefer at such like a unique point in their relationship where they have so much reinvigorated commitment to each other. And Geralt says as much when he was just like, I would have done anything for her, and I'm going to this ball. And you know, starting from there, their confessions, the way that they treat each other, you can all choke on your envy, etc. I think it's a really nice way to open it and to really focus on that partnership as he's kind of thrown into the lion's den. And on that note, the huge focus of this chapter really is the Mage's Ball at Thanedd. What insights about their political and social class did you guys take away from such a unique event?
One thing that was interesting to me is that basically they're all spies. They kind of mention that pretty much almost everyone here is a spy. In fact, it's unusual when they mention that Marty isn't a spy. She's just a healer. And they live in such an isolated social class away from other people. And they live such long times. Like how old Gerhard, how old he is like, it's really surprising to Geralt when he sees it on the painting. So they know each other so well. And it's like they're all playing this game of they all have their own motives. They all have their own agendas for each specific king that they serve, king or queen that they serve. But because they've all known each other so long and they're in a community where it's like the only other people who are like you are these other mages who are also all spies, they're really familiar with each other's tricks and they're constantly having to like try and play this game with each other and outdo each other. Like when Philippa and Doragore have that interaction and later on she's like, oh, you do know that stupid endangered species talk is just a prelude to him interrogating you. Or when Yennefer, Philippa's like, you do know that Sabrina spies for Hansel, and Yennefer's like, does she now? And they all think it's like a hilarious joke. And I think it is interesting that it's like as much as they really dislike each other, borderline hate each other, some of them, they are incredibly knowledgeable about each other. They know everyone's like their tics, their quirks, the things that they do, the way that they operate. It's almost redundant that they're going around trying to be sneaky because I guess or like trying to be pleasant to each other when they actually hate each other. They have all this stupid etiquette and it's almost like, why are you bothering? Because your job is to know each other so well and you're all doing the exact same thing. You've all read each other for filth the second you walked into the room. So it really feels like a very pointless game that they play where they're hiding all their motives, even though everyone knows their motives. You know, it's interesting seeing how they spar with each other, but they also know each other really, really well.
It does make you wonder how true to real life politics something like this fictional representation could possibly be as well.
Yeah, I was wondering how many actual mages do we think there is, because like this is like all of the major players of the North, right? So there's not that many people. Like I didn't count, but there's like less than 20, right?
I think he says early on in the chapter, so I've got my little book up.
Did I not read properly?
He says that a good 100 people were already there. When they entered the ball, a good 100 people were already there. the hall could have held at least 3 times as many.
Okay.
But that's just probably because they're in a really big fancy hall, because they're like very indulgent. But so there's at least 100 people there, and that's not including like people who aren't interested in politics, or like researchers, or I'm just thinking of a specific character who I think was not present but is a mage who comes up later. So it's like, how many people are there like her? So it just seemed like these are specifically the people who serve kings.
Out of like all the ones that work for kings and that are going to spy, I feel like since, as you said, Sarah, they live for so long, at some point, I mean, you just know them. Like, you've been with them for like hundreds of years, and so you're like, oh yeah, that's Sabrina. She's gonna try and sleep with you and get your old secrets.
Or even like when they're talking about Yennefer, and everyone's like, Yennefer's fucking losing her head. Like, little Marigold just smiled at the witch and she, blew up her hair. Like, they know her so well because they are colleagues who live really long, and they've probably seen her with like other partners who she has not given a shit about compared to Geralt. So it is interesting that
I feel honestly really bad for Geralt, because like, he's really our way into like getting an introduction to the whole mage society, because he just goes there and Yennefer's are like, this is who that is. This is who that is. It's like, you should say this. You should say hi. You should not do this. You should not do that. And she's really a guide to him, but also obviously to us, because we need that to sort of make this an understandable chapter. I just think it's really cute because it's already said in the beginning of a chapter that Yennefer has asked him before to come with her on events and things, and he's always refused. But that time he's like, as we said before, he's like, she's great, we're going to be a family. And then suddenly he's like, okay, I'll go. But maybe that was like the really big one, and maybe if he had gone to the other smaller ones, he could have been a bit more at ease with everything that was happening.
I really feel like he jumped into the deep end here.
Yeah.
He went to like literally the most high stakes banquet he could have possibly gone to, and it was his first one. Like, why is there not enough food?
I know. The man has priorities. But that was something that was really interesting about their class and this experience, is that like it's all about the pomp and circumstance and very little about the substance. And you can tell that in the way that there was no real food. There was no music. It was really just about parading. Yennefer and Philippa laugh at him when he asks why they're not dining at tables. And they're just like, how are you going to show off if your legs are behind a table? And I mean, I guess it makes sense, like in the context of the world and of the situation. But he's coming at this with such a practical, grounded place, whereas they are just so ostentatious. And there's so many errors for this. And it's hard to tell like where the line is, how much they're doing on behalf of their kingdoms versus how much they're doing on behalf of their own power, status, ego. I highly doubt Sabrina was sent in with like nipples out by her king or queen.
Hansel was like, Sabrina, listen to me. I know you're going to this banquet, but it's really important you show your nipples. Like, if you don't show your nipples, the whole kingdom is doomed. You have to promise me, Sabrina, promise me you'll show your nipples. And she's like, Jesus Christ, okay, fine, I'll show my nipples.
Show her nipples and her hips. I mean, she's showing everything. She's showing boobs, legs. I mean, it's the whole thing. Go, Sabrina.
When you kind of mentioned all that about kind of like everything's very ostentatious and it's all about showing off, but there's not really much substance, I really thought that, I don't know if this is me being like English lit teacher looking into things too much, but I thought the bit where Geralt and Vilgefortz were on the bridge, I thought that the bridge was a great metaphor kind of for the mages as a whole, in that it's, when you look at it initially, you're just like, it's just a functioning bridge. But when the illusion is washed away, it's like really dangerous. Parts of it are missing. It's not built for function at all. It's been eroded away and no one's actually bothered to fix it properly in a way that it can be used functionally. Instead, they've just covered it up with an illusion, with something very shallow and superficial. And I thought that kind of, when I was thinking about it, and I thought that is kind of the vibe of the mages as a whole. A lot of the things that they do, they're just for showing off or to give the appearance of wealth and ostentatious and like things looking pretty and like, oh, we're going to have all this food, but we're not really going to eat it because you're not really allowed to, because it's improper, it's fattening, you know, all these things. is like the bridge. It's you're not having any function or practicality there, and you're covering up the lack thereof with a fancy illusion of like splendor. I thought that was
And that can't go wrong at all.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be fine.
The status quo is going to absolutely stay the same forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
Really shows how much, being at the kings and queens beck and calls, and like really being at this special place in the society, how much riches we've gotten to it, and how used they have gotten to like fancy food, and just like look at all we can buy, look at those fancy seafood that we have, look at all this, like we're not even here to eat it, like who cares, this isn't even like sit down, we have fancy food here. Like it's more of a I don't even bother with it, like we can just have it.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take us me and Alycia, or Alycia and I, to overthrow Alyssa and just spend the rest of the episode talking about food and clothes? Who's Vilgefortz? We don't give a shit about him.
Listen, Anita and Caroline are doing it already, so you wouldn't be the first.
I do agree with Alycia though about the food, especially the wastefulness of it as well.
Yeah.
And I think this as well, like mage society, it does feel very wasteful. And that kind of that extravagance and indulgence where they're so rich and they're so powerful, they can get really expensive things and then they can just kind of waste it. And it's like so much of the food, I like did a tally of all the food that's mentioned in the chapter, and the majority of it is seafood. And there's that point at the beginning with the crabs that they were brought in by teleportation. That is a privilege that literally only they can have in that area, because otherwise the seafood would be off, and they've done it via teleportation. But then again, they're not eating much. They're like, they've gone to all this insane lengths to get this fancy seafood, and then it's like, well, you're not allowed to just stand there and eat it. You're only allowed to have a little bit and then move on. So it's like, it's so wasteful. Yeah,
I love how practical. I just really love the whole food teleportation thing idea. I could go on a rant about it. It's just so fucking cool to me. Whatever. But I just really like how down to earth Geralt's reaction is to that crab. He's all like, ooh, like I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Like I'm a bit worried. It's probably come from a faraway place and it's been here for a while. And Jennifer's like, oh, don't worry about it.
You forgot, Geralt. We're in the 1%.
Yeah. Geralt, we have money. we're not eating rats on like the side of a road.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does like feel like being an enchantress or being a sorcerer is like any other job. How casual they are about all of this wealth, all of this accessibility. It is nice that we get some, I think, fragment of hope from Yennefer that like, oh yeah, we're working on it for everybody. But again, like you don't know how true that is. But it is like a nice thought that they do have, hopefully, a helpful role in their society and in their kingdoms. But yeah, poor Geralt's coming in and being like, oh, I don't know if you should eat it. He's like worried about her.
I don't want my queen to get ill.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time he took care of an ill sorceress. So.
But can you? Oh God, no! Don't.
Uh-oh.
Watch out. This is a sensitive subject around here. No, but can you even imagine like how they would be able to like solve continent hunger? I was going to say world hunger, but with like this teleportation thing, if it is that easy, if like even the kings that are the head of states, they have mages that are able to do that probably quite easily, I'm assuming, then just like it really shows we're just doing it because we can. And we want at that moment, but we're not actually using our powers for the greater good,
Yeah, I wonder if this is a situation of kind of like art imitating life. You have the politics, you have that, one top percent that has the ability and the wealth and the means.
Yeah.
But whether or not they're actually making like systemic change or global change, continental change. And I think it's one of those situations where is this an observation or a commentary from Sapkowski? Because we know he illustrates that he's incredibly aware of the socio-political climate in our own world. And is this just him writing a ball and a lavish one at that in a way that makes sense? Or is it an additional commentary on the way that the world and politics operate? I'm not sure, but I'd be interested in opening that conversation too. as we've spoken about, we spend this chapter with Geralt as he navigates this social and political minefield at the ball and his evening with Yennefer. How would you guys say his relationship with her has shifted from previous books and chapters? What would you say is new in their relationship here?
One of the things that I feel like was always one of the biggest problems of their relationship is the miscommunication and the kind of them assuming things about the other, but being too proud to actually go and ask. They don't want to be the first to cave. And in the first page, I think, of the chapter, when he says, after a very long and frank conversation, and the resentment and stubbornness and pride was melted away. And I think that's showing how it's they're beginning to overcome that kind of the immaturity of the fact that Geralt addresses her as dear friend because he doesn't know how else to do it. Or in the previous chapter when Yennefer's no, don't let him know that I was thinking of paying off his debts, or else I'm sure he'll hate me for it. And it's you both still have a lot of fondness for each other, but you're too afraid that the other one doesn't, and you don't want to actually speak to them and if you just did, you would find out that you both still have feelings for each other, but they're too afraid to, and they're too proud and stubborn to. And I think that because of Ciri, I think that has changed to the point where he's able to say, I love you out loud instead of just thinking it. He's able to take that leap. He has that trust in her that he's able to say it out loud instead of just thinking it.
I feel I'm not going to go back on the rant that I gave last episode about having Ciri change Geralt and Yennefer's relationship, but it's the first moment that they're actually together after having been with her, and it just really shows how much parenthood has made them grow up as two individual characters and has enabled them to be more mature and actually be honest about their relationship. Okay, this is happening. I like you. Let's do this. It's not, we're not going to be petty about it anymore.
I think when we first see Geralt and Yen in The Last Wish, obviously they're meeting for the first time. They're combative, I think, more than anything. Kind of the same thing in A Shard of Ice. There's that huge power play between Geralt and Istrid, and then Yennefer just abandons them both. I think for everybody's sake, right? Or for her own fears as well. The Dear Friend letter is, again, so iconic and so hilarious and soul-crushing at the same time. I don't know how you guys would describe it, but it's one of those things that, it is another kind of milestone in their relationship where they have attempted to pull apart, but they know that they still need to rely on each other in a certain extent, and that's with Ciri. So we see Yennefer's relationship with Ciri throughout Blood of Elves Chapter 7, Time of Contempt Chapter 2, and that she really has taken on a motherhood role. In some ways, they're re-meeting as new partners. I think they're starting on a fresh page. As you said, Sarah, they're a lot more honest with each other. And that honesty manifests as a number of sex scenes toward the end of the chapter, but also as an open declaration of love, which I think, again, in classic Sapkowski writing, it's both sincere and very comical, because you have the declaration of love, and then Geralt immediately chokes when Yennefer tells him that she loves him back, and she's like, lift up your arms, they'll thump you on the back, and it's it's very, very silly, which I do appreciate. But yeah, I think there's still some sensitivities there as we hear their conversation the following morning too.
Yeah. It feels especially coming from Geralt, it feels like when he says "I love you," it just feels like a passing thing. When you've been dating someone for a while and you just say, it's not like this big first time declaration. He's just get me some food, blah blah blah. Oh, I love you, and Yennefer doesn't even notice at first. She's I don't know, berating him about seafood or whatever. I can't remember what it is exactly.
I said, drop the ostentatious. Geralt, did you just say I love you?
God, did you just say you just tell me you love me? And when it feels like to me when she says it, it feels like, oh my God, finally he said it. I can say it myself, and it feels like this thing that she's been meaning to say forever. And to Geralt, when he says this can't possibly be the first time that I've told you, and to him it's just I love you, bye. It's sort of everyday thing, which is which feels very them for some reason. I know that some people might have expected some sort of like a really big love declaration, like a very romantic moment where they're like looking at the stars together and there's a lot of poetry and everything. But I feel like every part of our relationship coming from the beginning of them getting together has been really so unusual. And so, this just feels right for them, to me at least. I know that some people might argue, but I like it.
Yeah.
I definitely agree, because I love how mundane and kind of banal it is, that instead, like, they're both inhuman. They're a witcher mutant and an unfeeling witch, and they're also famous. They've had ballads written about them. You would expect it to be a really like grand declaration. You'd expect it to be really dramatic, and instead they're just saying it over seafood while she's like, "I'm really hungry, pass me the salmon," and he just blurts it out. And I think that makes it, even though they are inhuman, quote unquote, it makes it feel more human. And I think as well, I really like the fact that the previous scene, the choke on your envy, that kind of is Geralt showing off. It's him, he knows that the mages are trying to read his mind, and he's doing a big fuck you to them, being like, yeah, choke on your envy. Haha, I'm with Yennefer. She's my bae. I'm going to make me sound really old and outdated. And never mind, but that was him showing off. Whereas their actual confession, the thing that really matters, is just a quiet, incidental conversation that they have. And it contrasts against how the mages are so preoccupied with constantly showing off, the constant ostentatious behavior, and, making everything as splendid as possible. So it's having that contrasted with the really mundane confession, the just really incidental confession, makes it more special. Because if it had been Geralt being like, "I love you, Yen," shouting out into the hall, you'd be like, well, what if he was just showing off to the mages again? That would always be a motive that would be in the back of your mind. Instead of him saying it really quietly and then getting embarrassed and choking on his food, It's like, it makes it nice.
Yeah. I do really love, like, just to expand upon that moment, when we get toward the end of the chapter and they make love, and he knows that Yennefer, her telepathic abilities are heightened afterwards. And so he just kind of lays there and imagines really nice things for her. And that's such it's so sensitive, it's so sweet, and incredibly, thoughtful, both literally and in other ways. And it's like, there's so much consideration and care in that very simple act. And it's a different kind of intimacy, I think. So you have both the physical intimacy and the emotional intimacy, and both seem to make her feel cared for. So yeah, I find that really nice as well. And that again feels like a unique moment in the relationship that we've never experienced before as readers, because everything else has been so high stakes, high pressure, combative, and then now we're seeing what they're really like behind the curtain, and I think it's lovely.
Yeah, I do as well. It's just really sweet. And it's like she has a specific, because of her telepathy, it's like she has a specific need that he is meeting. And it's something that you wouldn't see in like a normal couple. It's a consideration he has to make for her, because she is the way she is, because she's a mage. So it really makes you go, wow, love really is like the shape of a pear, huh?
I just got chills when you were just like, oh, he's meeting a specific need that she has. Ugh, I feel so romantic and gross right now. But it's true. Like, it's true. I think that's something that, like, we don't talk enough about in relationships, is like the unique needs of like a partner, and what that might look like, and how to really consider and care for them. There are so many universal things about being in a relationship. That's, love and everything. That's why we can make shitty memes about it and songs, and people can, and like musicals and things, and people understand and relate to like most concepts of love. But yeah, I love that you kind of pointed that out as something that's beautiful and unique to her, that he's making special considerations for. Oh, I feel so gross now.
Quickly, let's talk about Vilgefortz.
Ooh,
to offset it.
I mean, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that is next in my notes. And
maybe I'm psychic.
We're just going to throw some cold water on that conversation. I mean, And yeah, on that note, on that high, we come back to I guess as the ball continues, we see the rest of Geralt's experiences, all the silly things he has to endure between the mages and Dijkstra and Yennefer herself. And we open to a new portion of the chapter in which Geralt and Yennefer are after the ball, they're making love. These are the scenes that we're kind of seeing. But Geralt and Yennefer's evening serves as a framing narrative for his conversation with Vilgefortz. And I want to ask you guys, why do you think Sapkowski frames Vilgefortz and Geralt's conversation with his morning after with Yennefer?
I mean, some people might really love the whole Vilgefortz conversation, but as we've said before, it just really invokes me. So it feels to me like, oh, boring conversation, sexy, boring conversation, sexy. let's keep going.
I only thought about this after I'd read, God, is it chapter 5, where Sapkowski is in the entire chapter, sorry, spoilers, but the entire chapter is just exposition. There's a lot of exposition. And I noticed that, like, when I was reading it, it is a very specific narrative technique that he's doing where he's having two characters talk about an event that's happened, and then he jumps back to someone else in that event, and they're living through it, and then he goes back to the original two characters who were talking about it. And I assumed that was basically, if he just had the two characters talk about everything that happened and them just relaying it to each other, it'd be so fucking boring. It would just be like, why am I reading this? So jumping back and forth between the point of views, and he does it multiple times in that chapter, it makes it a bit more interesting, because then you're reading a character who is actually there and doing it and living through it. And I think he kind of did a similar thing here, in that Yennefer and Geralt are talking about Vilgefortz, and that's something that the plot is dictating that they do. They always it's a necessity that they need to have this conversation. But obviously them just talking about it would be really boring. And just having Geralt say, and then Vilgefortz said this, and then Vilgefortz said that, and all the little details you would miss out on, like whatever Lydia is doing in the background and things like that. And his feelings at the time you would miss out on as well. But then I think the reason why it's good that he doesn't just say, it's not Yennefer's like, hey, Geralt, tell me everything about Vilgefortz. And Geralt's like, okay. And then just the entire conversation takes place. And then at the end, it's like, okay, so that's everything that happened. He splits it up with going back to Yennefer and Geralt, because it helps contextualize what they're talking about and also giving their reactions. And because, it's one thing to show the conversation and to see like what Geralt is thinking. But obviously he's not going to be giving necessarily his full reaction to this guy that he's been warned about multiple times is very smart and very, a bit dangerous in how clever he is. And also importantly, we want to see Yennefer's reaction. So I think that having it go back and forth between the past conversation with Vilgefortz and the current conversation with Yennefer, it makes the passage more interesting, but it also helps break up the extremely long, tedious conversations with Vilgefortz, but it also gives us context about why they're talking about this, what their priorities are, and how they're feeling about it. And I think that's just useful. It means that we're seeing the events with Vilgefortz, but it's helping to add to the characterization with Geralt and Yennefer. Even the thing that Geralt keeps on fixating on the doll, or you think, little things like that. It kind of shows where their minds are going as they're thinking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the contrast between Geralt's thoughts in the moment versus his reflections with Yennefer are very interesting. And especially once he's had time to process and he's talking to Yennefer about it. And it's this compounding realization that oh shit, Codringer was right. I got myself in the shitter. What is going to happen? But it comes after, he's has this long conversation with Vilgefortz in which Vilgefortz just continually pokes and probes at him. Yennefer, I don't think successfully reassures him, because we hear from his first person perspective that he's still really wary about the whole situation and doesn't understand where he stands. So I think it's nice that we've seen him over the course of the chapter. We've been with him throughout the whole chapter. But we're able to see the things that he's telling her and also everything that he chooses to keep private, which I find incredibly fascinating. And yeah, I mean, we can dig into the conversation with Vilgefortz itself too, to whatever extent that you guys want. It's interesting to say the least. Like I said, I forgot that it was so dense since the last time that I read this book. And there were parts of it that felt, really expected, in which Vilgefortz is just kind of, whipping out his stick to measure against Geralt, and they're trying to scare each other. And it's kind of like, what is this? What is this measuring stick for? He tries to threaten or scare Geralt with the concept of death, which is super interesting. They go through the Gallery of Glory, and we hear a lot about the history of the continent and the way that it was established, all of the first mages, and the history of magic specifically. There's a lot there, a lot of exposition for readers about what has happened, and the context for this council specifically, and why it has become the way that it is, why it has this level of influence and power. And then Vilgefortz kind of continually gets a lot more personal throughout the course of the conversation. What did you guys think about the conversation as a whole?
There was something that you mentioned in the notes that I thought was really interesting, is that when he's talking about, so is womanhood, you wrote in the notes, is womanhood an equal of death, and can death be made obedient? And then you wrote Ciri.
Yeah. Just loose thoughts.
Yeah, but I think that's really interesting, because Ciri definitely is a representation of death in the series. And she's and is directly referred to multiple times in the text. And I have to give a shout out to my friend Nimue, who you can find them as Innis Vitre on. I'll give you the details to put maybe in the little text document at the end. They did a really good video on YouTube that's a big biography of Andrzej. Is in a lot of detail. It's great. But I messaged them and I said, hey, do you remember the times in which Ciri is referred to as death in the story? And within 2 minutes, they came back with multiple screenshots of every single time that Ciri is referred to as death in the story. So yeah, big shout out to them. They were very, very quick and very, very helpful with that. But I do think it's interesting, even the fact that literally the chapter before, she is called Death when she's being chased by the Wild Hunt. And one of them says, yes, we are corpses, but you are death. And then there are a few times later on in which someone is either calling her death directly, or even a point where she calls herself death directly. And I'm not going to give the context for any of those situations. But I think it is really interesting that it's I do think the fact that the equation of womanhood with death, and him making it very, very clear that this is something he thinks he can control, and he wants to be dominant over women. He literally admits that. He's like, I want to be dominant over women, and the first woman that I had a relationship with, it pissed me off that I couldn't do that, so I broke up with her because he's a fucking scumbag.
It's so gross.
So I think it's almost like that connection, knowing then that the chapter before, and then when you reread it, and you realize that Syrian death is not it's not a one-off comparison. It does crop up a lot of times. It is almost let's just say it's interesting that he's equated womanhood and death as both things that he wants to control, and then Ciri is also death. That's just, it's a little interesting, little tiny hint about him as a person. And this is also spoiler, so you might have to cut this out. Sure. But this is just something that I thought was interesting as well for you two. It's really ironic that Vilgefortz was like, I can control women and I can control death, and he also wants to control Ciri, and he fails on all three accounts. He tries to, and he was like, do you think you can control Yennefer? He fails to control Yennefer. He cannot torture her for information about Ciri. He fails. He tries to control Ciri, and then he ends up dying as a result, so he doesn't even control death in the end. He literally is a lose-fail man. Pathetic little guy. He can't do anything right. But yeah, so when I saw that, I thought that was, it was like, oh shit, I hadn't pegged that in my head. But then when I was like, hey, how many times is Ciri referred to as death? And then it was like, Hera, all the time. So I was like, oh Jesus, it's quite a lot of times. This is a very deliberate thing. It is interesting that's definitely is something that you would probably only pick up on your second reading through the chapter, that you're like, wait a second, what's he getting at here?
Yeah, it's incredibly ominous, I think, the way that Vilgefortz talks about women and it's the cutaway is strange. So Vilgefortz very abruptly says, oh, Geralt, what do you think about women and your relationship to women? Do you think they could be controlled? And Yennefer and the flash forward interjects and she's like, "What did you say?" And he's like, "You know what I said and how I answered." And Vilgefortz says, "Ah, that's right." And I had such like, I was so disoriented reading that, and I'm like, did I miss something in Polish? Me reading it, I didn't understand the way in which Geralt responded, and I would assume that he talks about, because I think there was like a moment where he's like, "You know how I responded," and then he like touches her boob or something like that. And
That's a necessity.
and like I'm just like, did you tell Vilgefortz that your way of dominating a woman is exclusively like lewd? Like, I don't understand. And like I said, I don't know if I missed something something was missed in the translation, or if I was just a complete dullard while I was reading it. But I was like, I can't confidently say what Geralt's response would be. But as I was reading it, I think regardless of Geralt's response, Vilgefortz seems to have a very specific perspective on, I can control death, and if I can control death and womanhood, then everybody will be as one, and we will have no need for, like, I don't know, sex or hierarchy and any of this other stuff, and we will have conquered death. And like, I didn't see the connection there, and everything was just very whirling at that point, and I was just like, I don't know if I understand this specific section.
He's just a little freak, isn't he?
Geralt's or Vilgefortz?
Oh, Vilgefortz, yeah. He's a little freak, derogatory, Vilgefortz is. Yeah, I found that passage quite weird, and like, you know, Sapkowski, is cool technique he does, but also kind of annoying, you know, when it's like he basically will infer something off screen just through dialogue, and you're like, sometimes you pick up on it. Like, he did that a lot in the chapter that we did, you know, when it's like Ciri accidentally blows up the shed and all the priests are running over again. It's like, calm down. So it's like you can infer what's happening off screen even though it's not being said. But here it was, and I think it is partly because Vilgefortz is so talkative, to put it nicely, that it is kind of, he's very flowery in the way that he speaks, that it's like, what are you trying to say? And how is this relating to what Geralt said? Because I think that Geralt would definitely not feel the same way as Vilgefortz does about women. Like,
no, but he agrees.
not.
But Vilgefortz agrees, which confused me.
Exactly. So I'm like, was it meant to be that like Geralt was pretending otherwise to try and like you know, play it cool, Vilgefortz, and, you know, like not reveal his cards too early? Or was it the opposite, that Geralt was like, I fucking love women, and Vilgefortz was like, haha, me too. But then I started to doubt myself, because then later on in the chapter he's like, I fucking hate women because my mother left me as a child, and it's like, oh Jesus Christ. He just outwardly admits it. So that was quite I feel like one that's definitely open to interpretation.
Any thoughts,
I still view
Alycia?
Geralt as a feminist king, I guess.
Yeah,
maybe not in this specific scene.
Honestly, I feel like the whole conversation, I'm just really annoyed about it. Because it's just like keeps talking and talking and talking in all those convoluted ways. And I don't know if it's because I was reading the English version, and English is not my first language. And so I was all like, okay, I'm not sure I get all this. There's this like part, I think, where Geralt tells him, like, talk to me as if I were a cabbage. There's something about cabbage where, like, Geralt talk to me as if I were stupid, basically, like, explain it as if I were five. And then I was like, I'm version too. I'm so confused.
Yeah, I think because we have the same English copy. Alycia and I think the line is something along the lines of, he says like, please speak plainly and remember you're talking to a cabbage. That he's kind of like, he's putting himself down and being like, remember, I'm really stupid. But I feel like it's in a very sarcastic way, that it's like, I know that you are really patronizing, condescending, and you think that I'm really stupid. But and then later on, this is, sorry, a slight detour, but he later on, I think it's Geralt who says this, where he says, pretend that we're just two ruffians in the forest with a piglet over a spit trying to get drunk off birch tar. And I thought that was really interesting, because it reminded me of the earlier section with Dijkstra, when Philip is saying, Dijkstra's preferred manner of a banquet would be, you know, getting drunk off of ale and falling asleep under the table and like blah, 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 blah. And Geralt, who until that point had disliked Dijkstra, it was like he felt more benignly about him. And it's almost like there was this perceived camaraderie between them of like, oh yeah, we don't like these ostentatious balls. We want to, you know, just get drunk off of ale and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that he then, I think it's Geralt who says that, uses that technique here where he's evoking an imagery of like common food, like peasant food, to try and be like, yeah, come on, let's just, you know, our childhoods are slightly similar. Just talk to me like a normal guy. But I do think it's interesting that on both of those occasions, that perceived camaraderie is absolutely absent. Geralt might think it's there, but it's really not. Even with Dijkstra, there was that moment where it's like Dijkstra, he's wearing the doublet, but he has it loosened and he's clearly at ease. So it's like, even though he's like, I would rather be getting drunk and sleeping under the table and blah, 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 it's like he's at a completely different level to you, Geralt. He's been to these things so many times. This perceived camaraderie that you think that there might be doesn't actually exist because it's just at a different level to you. And I think it's the same here. That Geralt keeps on trying to be like, speak to me plainly, Vilgefortz. Come on, just be a bro. Come on, let's just talk plainly. And Geralt and Vilgefortz are just like, no, you've mistaken the stars, blah, blah, blah. And it's, you know, Vilgefortz, at least Dijkstra pretends that Vilgefortz is filled with so much contempt that he isn't even going to try and pretend and stoop to that level. He's like, you're either operating at my level or you're just not a player. You know?
Yeah, and I think that's the really interesting thing about like all the comparisons that Vilgefortz is searching for. He spends a lot of the early part of their conversation trying to bring Geralt up to his level and trying to elevate him to the level of a sorcerer, up until he actually explicitly asks Geralt, "You should join the ranks of sorcerers. Have you ever thought about it?" And Geralt's like,
"You what, mate?"
You've been rooting around my family tree. And so it's like Vilgefortz has obviously been investigating him and researching him, but he spends the whole time trying to lift Geralt to an intellectual level, and Geralt is having none of it. He's like, no, come down here. Come down here, whisper to the cabbage. And it's like, it does, and I think, again, that's like trying to evoke pre-sorcerer Vilgefortz, like mercenary Vilgefortz, ruffian Vilgefortz, is Geralt's way of doing that. Where it's no longer about, hey, you come down here from like Almighty and talk to this cabbage. It's like, no, there's a part of you that still knows that you were a mercenary and that like this is how we're going to meet face to face. So it's interesting. Although I think unsuccessful because their conversation doesn't really seem to have any sort of solution or ending. It ends on a rather ominous note, right? Like,
and it ends with like, your time is up, the hourglass has run out or something, which is a very ominous way to end a conversation.
And I think that takes us to as well, like just the last question that I have around this is, why do you think Geralt's neutrality continues to put him at odds with characters like Dijkstra, Philippa, and Vilgefortz? And like, what do you think Geralt stands to like keep or to gain by like insisting that he remains neutral throughout this entire political mess? Like the stuff with Vilgefortz I find so interesting because like, again, he was asked about this by Dijkstra. He's like, you have to choose a side. You can't remain neutral. Vilgefortz says the same thing at the end here. And both of them are like, well, if you're not with me, you've lost and you're missing the boat. And I'm so curious to hear what you guys think about this as well.
I think it's really, and this is something that I feel like your opinion kind of changes once you know everything that happens, once you've read the book as well. The first time that I read it, I was just like, okay, this is just Geralt being himself. He's like, I'm neutral. And but when you read it and you kind of realize the folly of it, it feels very different. Once you've read the book, you read this chapter again and you realize the folly of what he's doing, and you can almost sympathize a bit with Dijkstra and Philippa, not Vilgefortz because I hate him, but those two at least. The kind of frustration of it, and Geralt's like, why does my neutrality offend you all? And it's because it's like, Geralt, you're in denial. You cannot be neutral anymore. Because like Ciri is, well, this is kind of like, oh, spoiler, but Ciri is kind of cause of a bunch of things that's going to happen. She's basically, because various different political factions are very interested in her. They always have been. And there's been hints of this of Blood and Elves as well, their feelings about her. So Ciri is basically kind of very in the center of an upcoming status quo shift. And Geralt is very linked to Ciri. So whether he wants to or not, he is involved because she is involved.
Yes.
He can't be neutral. And I think the problem is that he's under this false impression that being neutral means that he will not be affected. And he even says that to Philippa. I can't remember the page number, but he says, like, I won't be affected, Phil. And it's like, are you stupid? Especially when you know what's coming and you know this isn't something that you can just throw up your hands and be like, well, this has nothing to do with me. Whether you want to or not, you are going to be affected, and everyone is going to be affected, both in kind of like the grand scheme of things with some like big kind of like world events that happen, but even on the personal stakes, that it's like multiple characters. I think Vilgefortz definitely and Dijkstra definitely make it very clear that they know that Ciri is alive. She's not actually dead, like the rumor that Codringer put out about the diphtheria. So they know that she's alive, and they make it clear that they're interested in her. So she is also very much tied up in their interests and what's about to happen. But Geralt thinks that he can protect her by being neutral, because he thinks if I'm neutral, I'm not going to be affected by any of this. And so that means I can protect her. But it's like, no, it's too late, Geralt. She's already involved. You have to it's kind of like he's putting his head in the sand a bit. That it's like, you need to pay attention to what's happening around you. You can't do things the way you used to do, because the writing's on the wall, and clearly something very big is going to happen, and something very big involving her. All these very important players are really interested in her, and all your previous attempts to make it seem like she's dead have failed. You know, even the fact that it's like the professor and the thugs following Yennefer and Ciri that Geralt kills the previous episode, like, Geralt, your attempts have failed. And I think it's like, maybe he's in denial, or he hasn't realized that it's like, he can't be neutral anymore. His attempts to be neutral and to keep her safe in that way have failed. And like it or not, he is going to be dragged into this, because she is going to be dragged into this, and because the world is about to change in a very big way. And that's why it's kind of frustrating. Like, I don't think he should have been like, yeah, Vilgefortz, I'm going to become a mage. I think you're great. It's like, that's just stupid. And I don't think he should trust Dijkstra or Philippa. But I think it's interesting that at the end, he's like, I have a bad feeling about this, but like, whatever. I'll just adapt to anything that happens. And it's like, no, Geralt, no, this is a big thing that's going to happen. And you think you'll be fine because of neutrality, but your neutrality was doomed before you even realized it a long time ago, you know? And I feel like that's as much as I can say without getting into spoilers, but it really is, when you know everything that's coming, reading this chapter, I found myself getting quite frustrated at Geralt. Because I'm just like, Geralt, babes, being neutral is not an option for you anymore. This is not going to work, you know?
Yeah. And neutrality is still a choice unto itself as well. And, like, we see the effects of that, too. Alycia, did you have any thoughts?
I feel like, more importantly, you know, both Yennefer and Geralt, I mean, I don't know if I can talk about this because it's next chapter.
Yeah, this is the problem with talking about this chapter. That so much is like, well, for the next chapter, when
because like, I feel like maybe, obviously it wouldn't have the same impact, but maybe if Geralt and Yennefer were aware of what was going to happen the next morning, or maybe if they had heard things like rumors about it, because they are responsible for Ciri's safety, they might have like either flown away or like run away, but they might have like actually taken a side, or like realized that, hey, you know, like, this is important, this is probably like life-changing and like the start of some very big social event, so we need to make a decision about this. But whereas, you know, I feel like on their part, they're just like at a party and they're like, oh, we're meeting people, and why is everybody being so ominous? This is weird. but you know what I mean? But we're not aware of what is going to happen. So I feel like, especially if I were on Geralt's shoes and Vilgefortz was being like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, this is going to happen, look at how stupid you are to want to be a sorcerer, blah blah blah, I would have been just like, I don't want to do anything, just leave me alone. So I don't blame them, honestly.
Yeah. Like, I think as well, I was thinking, like, even though I felt frustrated with Geralt, it's like, yeah, you can't fully blame him. And, like, I don't think he should have, like, sided with Dijkstra. I think it's, like, he could make his own side in the situation. And, like, I guess he tries to, but it's kind of, like, too little too late when everything kicks off.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the reasons why it's like, oh God, you're so close that it's like you can clearly tell that there's something up. But the problem is that they're kind of like in a den of snakes. Everyone's being shifty because they're mages.
Yeah.
That's what they do. Everyone's spying for someone else. Everyone's at odds with each other. Everyone has ulterior motives. So the fact that Vilgefortz is being shifty, that's not so different from Sabrina being shifty or Kira or Dijkstra. It's like, well, yeah, they're all very powerful mages who have been playing this game for a very, very long time. So it's kind of like, it's the perfect disguise that when there's something specific that's brewing in the air, the really important thing that he needs to be really aware of is getting lost amongst the rest of kind of like all the bullshit that like doesn't really affect him, or, you know, like all these things. It's just because of the way that mages are, you know.
No, I feel that.
And that's why it's a shame that it's like, damn, you were so close, but no cigar.
Yeah. I mean, you already, again, I'm going to talk about next chapters. I'm sorry. We're doing chapter 5, people. Chapter 4. But yeah, it just feels like such, because you know that something is up, because everybody, as we mentioned before, everybody's like, oh, you'll see tomorrow. And you already know that like tomorrow is not just going to be brunch and maybe, you know, a concert. You know that like something is actually going to happen. But then, you know, when you read the chapter afterwards, it just sort of, the scale of it, I think, just like kind of takes you by surprise, you as the reader. And so Geralt and Yennefer, because that's who you see it through, especially Geralt, because Yennefer is doing something else. But but yeah, I mean, maybe if they had known, they would have been more inclined to side or not have this sort of like neutrality driving him, because, you know, Ciri is there and he has to take care of her, and obviously she's a big player in that. And also like how I was going to say that maybe, you know, they're in love, they have a little family, they're at a party, they're a team, it's going good, and, you know, Ciri is going to go to Aretusa, and Aretusa's been there for millennials, and, you know, like it feels like this unshakable thing. It feels like this safe place, you know, kind of like Hogwarts is the safest place of a wizarding world kind of thing, you know what I mean? So like, what are the odds that everything would fall apart right as they're trying to take care of their daughter?
Yeah. I do think actually when you said like the scale of it, I think that really is right, that even though it's like, okay, Vilgefortz is like, oh, there's going to be a conflict, there's no point joining the losing side, but it's like the scale of what is really going to happen, I think definitely probably did take Yennefer and Geralt by surprise, and that led as well to the mess that happened, you know.
I do think that a lot of Geralt's neutrality is pretty informed by both his ignorance and his arrogance. Like, he just doesn't have a perspective on what is going on. We as a reader are privileged because we hear all these little snippets. We hear third, like tertiary character perspectives, like Applegat, for example, in chapter 1. We know what's happening on the continent. And we are privy to all of these conversations and these political machinations on the continent. And Geralt just isn't. And he continues to operate in this little bubble where he thinks that everything is okay and that he's keeping Ciri safe as possible. Like, I'm a little scared, Yen, but, you know, like, things will probably be okay with her. And he has no idea that the entire continent is mobilizing against him specifically. And I think that is, like, the frustrating part of it, in that, like, his neutrality puts him at odds with these other characters because they just know what is coming. They know that everything is out to get him and his ward. And they're making vague threats at him as I think a bit of a warning, but it's still like on him to take that and run, which he doesn't. So yeah, it's a very interesting point to end the chapter on, and a very ominous one, as we've said. I think as we kind of close out the chapter, do you guys have any like final thoughts on like this chapter and where it's going to lead us, not just for the rest of the book, but for the rest of the series, really?
Well, I just wanted to say congratulations, Alyssa, for making sure that I didn't spend a full hour talking about outfits. You got lucky. I had many thoughts about outfits.
Bonus content, baby.
My petty thought, actually, no, this is a genuine petty thought about the chapter overall. Sapkowski did me fucking dirty by not describing Yennefer's outfit. He describes everyone else's outfit, but not Yennefer's, and I think that's really rude. You know, I think that's really rude.
The only thing he says is black and white Yennefer.
Yeah, it's just like black and white. And I guess we get the diamonds with the onyx shaped like grapes. I'm like, okay, grapes are like, they represent like wealth and like bountiful harvest and stuff. But it's like, give me something else to work with here, man. Like, come the fuck on. I think that's kind of sad about this chapter is that this is kind of where we're seeing Geralt and Yennefer at their best. They've come together. They're in love with each other. They confess it out loud for the first time, which is something they've never done before. They have this shared, they're united over Ciri and they want what's best for her. And they're like, even when they have like a little disagreement here and there, they like smooth it over in a way that they probably wouldn't have done in the past. Like with the whole thing with Triss. When like Yennefer like is like he's fucking mine, bitch, to Triss. That was a great scene. So they're really at their best, and yet they still kind of fail. That by the end, despite everything that's happened and all these characters giving warnings, by the end, Yennefer is just like, don't worry, Vilgefortz was just trying to get under your skin. And Geralt's like, I'm not sure if he was, but whatever happens, I'll just adapt to it. And it's like, so despite the fact that they're kind of like at their peak as characters in their relationship with each other, they still don't properly take seriously the writing on the wall. And, you know, if only Yennefer had been like, maybe I should take what Vilgefortz said a bit more seriously. Or if Geralt had been like, Yennefer, I know you're saying it's okay, but I actually genuinely feel that, you know, maybe we should get Ciri out of here. Or like, you know, I have an uneasy feeling about this. If they'd had that conversation, maybe things would have gone differently. Maybe they wouldn't, you know, who knows? Yeah. But it could have done. They could have at least been more prepared for what was to come. And I just think there is something sad that is like, it's at the height of their relationship with each other and it's so romantic. And yeah, just in terms of the upcoming plot, they've ended the chapter on a bad step, on a bad note. They've put themselves in a bad position and they don't know it. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, I really, really, really like this chapter because it feels like such a central part of the whole plot of the series, because like it's really a switch between this sort of like, you know, there's politics and there's things happening, but mostly it feels like the scale of everything just switches suddenly because of what happens in Fand, because suddenly, you know, you go from this sort of like more, I don't know, like intimate story with Yennefer and Geralt and Ciri and their friends and families, and you know, there's less insane politics and kings and war, and suddenly there's this switch about halfway through the story where it's like, okay, everything is different, you know, all the people that you loved, we don't know what's going to happen to them. And then suddenly, you know, everything is different and everything takes a bit of a grander scale and a bit more important stakes. Is that the word I'm looking for? Stakes?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, this chapter is interesting, obviously, because Thanedd as an event and as like a plot point is so big and iconic and fun. I think, again, like as we're experiencing this event with Geralt, he makes it unique and it makes the experience a lot more pleasurable as a reader. But I do think that, you know, you're both right in that we have such a high for Geralt and Yennefer as parents and in their relationship. And we just see the affection and love that they have for each other, but it's just so shrouded in all of this mystery and politics that they don't realize yet is a liability and a burden in some extent. And that part is really scary because we just want to enjoy this with them. We want to be able to enjoy their night and their life with them. And I think we've been seeing the two of them in like bubbles with Ciri throughout the last, you know, couple of books. this is the first time that I think they're really feeling the political pressure. Yeah, they have like hitmen here and there, but like they're actually in Lion's Den, or the Serpent's Pit, or whatever you want to call it. And this is actively affecting them and actively threatening them. So I think highs and lows of this chapter, but it certainly makes for an interesting shift before we get to the storm itself. So that is it for our show today. Alycia, Sarah, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hanza for listening. So where can people find you guys, and is there anything that our community can help you with or anything that you'd like to share with them?
I feel like the easiest place to find me is actually on the Breakfast of Beauclair Discord, because I kind of got rid of a lot of my social media. I'm still on Twitter. I'm still on X. Sorry, times are changing. At Alycia Lamy, ALYCIALAMY, if you wanted to listen to me say weird stuff about weird things. But mostly, you can talk to me on the Discord if you feel like it. And that's it.
I just wanted to say also thank you very much for having us on this episode, because this was a really fun chapter, and it was just really nice to chat with you both again. Like, I really enjoyed it last time, so it was really nice to come back onto it. So thank you. In terms of social media, you can find me on Instagram with _Dolblethana. Dolblethana is in the location in Witcher. And you can also find me on AO3, because yes, I still am writing those witch stories on Archive of Our Own, and my username is Dolblethana. My main series is the Promises to Keep series, which is kind of more game-based. It takes place a year after the Blood and Wine DLC. There are many, many book spoilers, but if you go into it, be warned, I many times just sit down and explain, so this is when this character dies in the book, so, be warned if you ever give that a shot. And I've written a few other little AUs or one-shots as well, if you want to check out any of my writing. And I'm afraid my Instagram is just me putting pictures of my Witcher merch, because I spend too much money on Witcher merch. So if you want to see me become bankrupt, follow me on Instagram.
And you can find Sarah on the Hanza Discord as well, where you can find Alycia and everybody else in our community as they play D&D and talk about The Witcher and other silly things. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining again.
Thank you.
Yes, so lovely to have you both on. And next episode, join us as we continue our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 4. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the Tidings from Toussaint News, second by Alyssa from Witcherflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B. Haven at the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Egberg Glamorai, The Original Roach, Cottinger's Cat, Libby, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Mayor of Temeria, and Softy. Special thanks to Alycia and Sarah A. for joining us for this episode, and our international Hanza for their support.